We get to start it off. I love it. I told everybody that we would be really, really high energy because, it's the beginning of the morning. I said I would ply myself with coffee, and I think I've done that. Yeah,
Supplying.
yeah, okay. A little bit of plying. Yeah, thanks again, everybody, for coming. My name is Patrick Reed. I'm the executive director for IPX at Auburn University. Previously from the New Orleans area, I was here for the last 12 years at LSU Health New Orleans and have been involved in bio on the Bayou for a good long while. And it's been awesome to see how much it's grown. Today, I've got these amazing panelists to talk about leveraging untapped resources. And so, throughout my career, I've had the privilege of helping foster collaborations between academia, industry, the federal government, to unlock innovative solutions. And today's panel is all about shining a light on those resources that often go unnoticed, that can be game changers in advancing science and innovation. And so we've got panelists from a lot of diverse fields here, each with unique perspectives. And so we've got federal funding opportunities to corporate innovation and natural medical products. And our experts are going to provide some actionable insights today. We got to get that to help think beyond the obvious. So allow me to introduce today's panelists. So I have Ben Kromnick, head of healthcare and life sciences at Mercury, a leader in venture capital investments with a focus on funding life sciences startups. Thanks for joining us. Got Ann Carter, an expert in medical technologies at ApiCulture, who brings a fresh perspective in the products and programs medical device applications. Jake McGee, corporate innovation leader at Plug and Play Tech Center, who fosters collaborations between startups and large corporations, helping to unlock innovation through strategic partnerships. And finally, Adey Pierce, director of biodefense and government contracting at BDO USA, who has extensive experience helping the life sciences companies secure federal funding for projects, particularly in the areas of biodefense. So it's a lot of fun to be up here with a lot of smart people. So to start things off, I've got a question for the whole panel, and maybe we'll start, Adey, with you and then work our way down the line. But what are some of the most underutilized resources or strategies you've encountered in your respective fields that companies and researchers often overlook?
Can everyone hear me? Okay, all right. That's actually a really great question. Just really quickly, off the top of my head, I would say that oftentimes individuals think of other resources, they think of grants. And so, but there are a lot of other funding vehicles beyond grants that I think would be important to consider and look into, whether those are cooperative agreements or contracts, what have you. So there's a lot of other like I said, vehicles in the non-diluted funding space that I think are out there and worth looking into, particularly with agencies beyond just NIH. So.
Yeah, I'd come sort of from the plug and play perspective. I think it's really being able to tap into the ecosystem we provide. It's not just, corporations, VCs, it's, angel investors, people that have been in your shoes before, really using everybody that's interested in helping startups grow. As an organization, that's something that we like to put together. So it's having a strong foundation, but really being able to reach out, see what other people are doing, and really being able to grow together, and then building on what you're building uniquely.
Great answer. I would say that focusing on continuum-based outcomes, wherever your innovation is, how can we pull the thread from acute care, if that's where it's delivered, into the post-acute space and really driving people back home? I think there's going to be a new way to look at scalability, and a bunch of interests all around the country. Just a little bit is much different than getting to the end user and really driving outcome-based solutions.
I'm going to keep pulling on that thread and thinking about the advocacy groups, the interest groups that live around whatever solution you're building. So if you're building something that is directly for the patient, how do you find the patient advocacy groups, quite literally, who care deeply about exactly that experience? If it's in oncology, there's a million cancer groups. If you're in immunology, my father has transverse myelitis, relatively rare autoimmune disease, great Facebook groups. Go to them. They want to talk to you. They want to engage with you, and nothing. And I've been an investor, I've been an allocator, I've been a CEO. When you're an investor and you can actually see the patient's voice in that pitch, it solves that like kind of tricky thing of like, do people really want this? When you have the voice of the user coming through very strongly, and in medicine, that voice of the user is very often a patient, or it's the nurse, it's the clinical research informaticist who's oftentimes the person actually using your thing, the person actually impacted by your thing. Get as close to them as possible and leverage those resources, because they tend to be a force multiplier for the more typical resources we think about. Like, okay, well, I need money, so I got to go to the NIH program manager, or I got to go to the angel investor, or I have to go to the VC. When you go to those traditional sources of capital or influence with the voice of your end user, you might not even have a product yet. But if you have a concept that they can validate, and they can validate emphatically, it solves so many of these like nagging doubts that so often live in the more institutional, more traditional resource pools that you're kind of obviously going to access.
Awesome. I should have started by saying, because we're getting such amazing answers here, that we're going to ask some questions to the panelists, and then we're going to leave some time at the end for audience Q&A, about 10 minutes. So please keep your questions till the end. Adey and Ben, you're both work closely with funding. How do you see the roles of government funding and venture capital complementing each other in driving life sciences innovation? And are there situations where companies should prioritize one over the other? We always think non-dilutive funding first, obviously. And how should they balance the two when seeking resources?
I'll start.
Go for it.
So I think that non-diluted funding, particularly federal funding, what have you, can be sort of a great precursor or bridge to VC. And so oftentimes I think a good strategy or plan is to look at some of that earlier stage development, looking at those non-diluted funding agencies to sort of get to that milestone that makes it oftentimes more attractive for VC funding. Sometimes that is, we encounter VCs, they want to see that you're at a stage 1 clinical trial. Or even if you're thinking before that, the fact that a particular project has received a grant or a contract to develop a preclinical model or some of that proof of concept data, that is an attractive position we often see for VC companies, because then they see that the government has made an investment in a particular project. And so therefore it de-risks it in some capacity. So there's certainly a complementary relationship between the two. I find often if one can plan and pursue the non-dilutive funding first, that it does put one in a better position to pursue the VC route. So, Ben.
Yeah, I'll add to that. So venture capital is an asset class. Asset classes have specific parameters that define them, which means that if you're going to go for venture capital funding, you need to achieve those parameters, which is very often it is stage 1, it is having an IND. There are very specific characteristics that VCs are looking for, and it can be really, really expensive to get to those characteristics. That is literally where the NIH seed fund and the various non-dilutive funding sources that are out there, that is what they're for. The challenge, and there's this, I'm inspired by the B references on the other side of the wall here. Not venture capital, non-dilutive funding can also be a bit of a honey trap, in that you see there's an award out there, so you go build to that award. It might even be, it's a $20 million award if you go do these things. So you go do those things, and you go take $20 million, and then you take $20 million and you go build the company to do that. It might take you a year, might take you 2 years. But that probably wasn't exactly what you wanted to build. You probably wanted to be like right here, and then you kind of like veered off a bit to meet that award. And that can be okay. I mean, you do the same thing for angel investors often. As a CEO, having the discipline to stay on your track is so important, because especially in non-dilutive funding, you can start inching further and further and further away from what you wanted to build as you're chasing these non-dilutive dollars. And then you end up never achieving those venture asset class parameters. And then you end up being one of those companies that's raised $50 million in non-dilutive funding over 10 years, and you still don't have enterprise value. You've created cash flow through non-dilutive funding. You've been able to build lots and lots of assets probably, but they're not the assets you actually went out to go build, and they're not the assets necessarily that venture capital is looking to build. So there's not perfect alignment between what the NIH or HHS puts awards out for and what venture capitalists actually want to invest in. So as a CEO, being very clear about what problem you're looking to go solve, what your solution is to go solve it, and what the capital sources are that align to that. Just please don't go chasing grants for 10 years, because you get to the end and you go, I've got all this IP and I've got all these grants. And you spent 10 years building something that nobody wants to invest in and probably isn't also solving problems for the patient or for our healthcare system. And fundamentally, most people start these companies because they want to help a patient. Some people start companies because they just want to do research for 10 years, which is totally okay. But tell people that, tell your employees that, tell sometimes even your grant program managers that. And if there is a private investor who's coming in, tell them that too, because they're entitled to know that from the beginning.
So just to piggyback on your thought, because that's a really important point and something great to consider, I would also add that particularly at this stage, the federal government, when they think about the investments, particularly if they are establishing a capability or expanding a capability of a company or developing a product, the priority of commercial sustainability has increased dramatically. So they are looking, the government is not in the business of keeping companies alive. And so therefore, they want to see a plan that exists that shows that this, whatever it is that you're developing, will go on and continue to grow and have a life beyond that, so that it can sort of marry to the point about what VCs are interested in investing in. So as an overall strategy, there may be value in sort of using those non-diluted funds to sort of get you started or get you to a place then that you can sort of expand in a way that allows you to still get to what those other goals are if they're not aligned. But I do think that that's an important piece, the commercial sustainability part, because that hasn't always been the case with how the government has invested, but there's much more of a priority of that now.
And are you seeing that really help weed out those folks that want to do research for the next 10 years rather than, make a commercial play or bring something to the market?
So I think that's a lot of when you get into the difference between a grant and a contract or a other transaction agreement or a cooperative agreement, because there are real goals that are outlined and expectations, milestones that are expected to be achieved during the process of that particular project. And so it's not as open-ended, so to speak, as some of the grant-funded research where let's just see where this takes us. There are specific goals towards licensure or clearance of a device or expanding a capability, what have you. And part of that process is they want to see your commercial business plan. What's your plan for keeping this alive beyond this 3 or 5 year project? So yes, there's a lot of emphasis in that way.
Great. All right, moving to Jake and Ann. Your roles involve two very aligned and innovative spaces. Jake, corporate startup partnerships, and Ann with medical device applications. What strategies can early stage companies or those working in different fields employ to gain attention and traction within large corporate ecosystems?
Yeah, I think for us, we've had actually recently a lot of alignment with universities, because coming really from top down, it's been what's the best path to get from research to commercialization to economic development to new startups being built out in these different regions. So one of the things we really try to emphasize is, have a strong foundation of who you are, but let the customer as well kind of dictate what it can look like. Don't be too pigeonholed on what you're exactly doing. And that's really where plug and play's ecosystem of everybody I've mentioned comes into play, where you can really see what these opportunities are, build with it, let the commercialization kind of take that natural path. One example we've really liked to use recently is a company called Lazarus that went through our insurance cohort about 1.5 years ago. Then we had some DoD partners that were in the building during one of our summits. They were able to see it. It was around unstructured data. And then they've now turned into a defense company, really working with a lot of different partners. So really what we've seen is use the strategy of knowing who you are, but don't be unwilling to listen to what is out there and what that could determine in the long run.
I would just add that the corporate ecosystem, yes, that's where everyone's wanting to go potentially, but getting into your end users ecosystem is, I think, undervalued and under-resourced. So not only like going to get feedback from your end user, but also there's a lot of people in healthcare operating on the outside of the inside of influence within companies. And so how do you employ those people or bring those people in to talk with your end users? Because innovation without a creative strategy to implement is really where those companies end up kind of stopping. So my encouragement is to think about those first 3 customers and what they can do to build your story, to share their data, to acknowledge a problem, to answer the call to innovation, and then share their data publicly. They can help write the playbook for you, but just don't forget that someone has to be with the end user. Maybe the chief medical officer has to approve it, and the C-suite has to buy into it. But without the end user's buy-in, things don't move as fast. So just always think about who is the actual end user.
Is this almost a plug for an iCore, customer discovery like program, or no? I'm seeing a head
Yeah.
shake.
I think it's different than that. So I was a professor with iCore out of USC, and I've worked with their groups up in New York for a long time. And iCore is great for user discovery. Like, what is like I am a student. I think I have an idea. I want to validate that this would solve a problem for a user. What Anna's talking about is something that I think is really, it's much more involved than that. This is, who do I go partner with? Like, let's say I go get that first contract. Your business model needs to go all the way down to how do we get users to use the thing, especially if you have a utilization-based model. So I've built a lot of software programs where the value of the software increases the more it is used internally. Just having the contract, it might be really hard to rip out, and you can kind of like oracle the thing such that it becomes like you've got these long contracts, and there's all this recourse for early termination, and you're like integrating with the EHR. So there's lots of really hard ways to take it out. But usually, software gets more valuable when you add nodes to the network, and if the users there don't use it, no other nodes want to touch it, and if it's really expensive to get users to use your thing, your business model is flawed. And that puts like a real rate limiter on the growth of the business. So being able to figure out like the most efficient, effective way to get users to actually love this thing, use it, and then evangelize it, it's this like turbocharge for your business model. And I would even put out a challenge to like corporate partners as well. That like, don't pilot things and then sign commercial contracts and then hide all of your data. Like that is, I guess maybe for our university medical system friends who are here, if you're using a new innovative piece of software or device or consumable and you like it and you use it, like don't keep that a secret. Publish data on it. Publish like these case studies and enable those innovative people who built with you to like continue to grow and to scale.
I'm just going to add one other thing, and that's who has the access to get you in front of that end user and can really create that partnership. And we're talking about working with like throughput directors. I mean, this is a whole new role about how do we pull people from an acute event in the hospital and make it so they're not living there for 47 days, losing their function to walk, losing their ability to get to the toilet. Like those are the critical things, I think, that all of the things that are being developed are going to lend themselves to. But the more you lean into it, we are going to value-based payment model. And finally, CMS is going to make that buzzword like an actual thing. So align with that, I would say.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to stick with both of you.
Oh boy.
Yeah. But switch it up a little bit. And how do you see the current funding landscape supporting innovation in medical devices, especially compared to other sectors like pharmaceuticals? And are there unique challenges in attracting investment for medical technology? And how can companies in this space better position themselves for growth?
It's a long question.
I know it is.
All right. I think generally we're talking about like the difference between like, let's say like therapeutics, diagnostics,
Right.
Diagnostics devices, software, and we want to focus in on the device side.
Sure. Yep.
Okay. So one of the things I find really fascinating about the device side is it is both it's a different type of capital intensive, not in a way like a therapeutic is just long, so much time and so much uncertainty. Like the amount of risk in therapeutics is just out of this world, and it's why we need the NIH and HHS, because there's so much. It requires net new science very often. Sometimes we're recycling old IP and reapplying it into like new directions and new indications. We're adding in new IP to old IP, which you can help to de-risk, which is really great and can be much more capital efficient. But on the device side, I find it to be much more capital efficient on going from like, I have an idea, is it viable? Like that we've gotten way better at sprinting and prototyping into viability of the hardware itself. So from a venture capital investment side, you're able to go you're able to achieve like way more of the life cycle way faster, because you can go from idea to like viable product idea pretty quickly. And then it's much more capital intensive, but there's a lot of hardware expense. So the capital stack looks really different. So when you're as a venture capitalist, you're coming in, you're wanting to invest in the IP itself. You want to invest in the team and the distribution of that IP, but you don't like, I don't want you spending my equity dollars on building a production line. The debt is great for that. There's all kinds of structured debt that you can be utilizing. I think we have like the CSC team is here who can like do like lease to buy. There's also a lot of creative ways that you can leverage your company in order to build that hardware, which is it's just CapEx. So don't take big equity dollars to build a production line or to buy your consumables to go build the thing. Take the equity dollars in order to define that new IP and that like new business model, and then to scale sales. And even once you get into scaling your sales, if you have a 6 months, 12 months of consistent sales runway and utilization, even then you don't want equity dollars. You want to be debt financing that scale, because as a founder, that equity is everything. Like that's what changes your life. It's what changes your kids' life, your grandchildren's life, your community's lives, because you're able to retain that equity. That's I will say it's an error I see. I often a lot of first-time CEOs will make is an investor will come in, they'll say, I've got a great idea. I understand how everything works here. I'm going to come buy a bunch of your company. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Like I have all this money now. I can go build it. So yeah, that's true. But you lost most of your company in order to do that. And you could have debt financed a lot of it, and you can go a lot more stepwise, which as a CEO and as an equity investor, you're de-risking every one of those steps. When you go from like IP creation to validation to product prototyping and all your different like FDA or whatever your regulatory body is, approval steps, you can get through those relatively quickly compared to therapeutics, at much lower cost compared to therapeutics. There's so many more opportunities for like non-dilutive financing, not necessarily grants, but just debt financing in addition to grants, in addition to the equity side. So the very different ecosystem. Also geographically, it's really different. You get markets like Minneapolis, which are massive for medical devices, or Wisconsin is massive for medical device. Yes, San Francisco is still a big place. Yes, Boston is still a big place. Yes, like Northern Virginia, DMV is still a big place for medical device. But there are other geos that are very relevant, oftentimes built around these high IP creation universities. So the ecosystems are different, and the capital stack can be really different.
Got it. Anne?
I think that what I'm seeing in acute care is the complete inability to even purchase medical devices to help support the highest revenue generating lines in the hospital. There's just not that capital. So if you do have a device, I would say that it's more important than ever. And I compare it to forensic files. It's like if there's no DNA and no body, like there wasn't a crime. And I think if there's no ROI, if there's no throughput that this is going to deliver, if there's no impact on length of stay or getting people recovering and aging at home, you have a much harder sell.
Great, thank you. Jake, you've worked with a wide array of startups for plug and play. For companies looking to transition from R&D to commercialization, what internal resources within corporations are often overlooked, but you think could be crucial?
Yeah, I think I touched on a little bit earlier. It's just really using everything around you. You know, plug and play really tries to bring together a lot of those resources in these different events, webinars, opportunities to really bring people together. If it's angel investors, if it's VCs, if it's corporations, if it's other startups, really lean on those resources, really lean on knowing who you are as an organization, but lean on what's around you, what's out there to help grow. I know a lot of the startups, especially in this space, are very pointed to a specific, goal and topic. But knowing what other startups are doing in your spaces, knowing what major corporations are looking for, are going to help you in the long run to be able to validate the technology, to get funding, to get additional partners, to get additional pilots. And that's something that we see a lot of. For example, in a couple of weeks, we have our summit coming up where there's going to be 3,000-4,000 people across, our 500-600 different partners, where, even if you have a specific topic, really hear what's going on in other spaces, really see what's moving a lot of these markets forward. And I think it'll really be able to allow you to grow as a startup, because it's knowing what's top of mind right now across a lot of different spaces. And then, it might be healthcare, it might be supply chain, it might be sustainability. There's still usually themes that are sticking out that are really wanting to be seen and wanting to be met. And that's something that if you stay on top of that, really know what's going on, what other bright entrepreneurs are doing, it usually can help you in the long run to stay on the forefront of your space.
Great. And Adey, you've seen this with companies you've worked with as well. What perspectives can you offer in this space?
So I think it's important to keep in mind, particularly when thinking about federal funding and non-diluted funding, is that there are many opportunities not only to support product development through traditionally HHS contracts and grants, but also DoD, because the Department of Defense is very interested in making sure that whatever medical technology, whether it's devices, anything in the life sciences that might be needed for the civilian population is also needed for the warfighter. And so therefore, they are very much interested and invested in funding research projects, technology advancements, what have you. So I would emphasize that it's important to keep in mind that there's this whole other market space that one can tap into in looking at funding opportunities as well. And the other thing that I would mention is that there are several established consortia within the federal government that are of no cost or minimal cost. And they emphasize collaboration as well as informing, bringing together partnership and industry as well, so that while you might have a great product or technology, but need a manufacturing facility or some other CRO capability or what have you, that these are spaces that you can come together, recognize where there may be opportunities for collaboration and pursuing funding in that manner as well. So
great. I've got some more questions, but I would like to open it up to the audience. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so does anyone have any questions for our esteemed panel? If not, I've got us covered.
Oh, so many mics.
All right, well, I will keep going then. Oh, there we go. Down here.
Great panel so far. I read an article a couple of weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal that there's a decline in angel investing. Have you guys seen that, and what do you think the impact has been on deal flow?
I'm happy to start. So the macroeconomic conditions directly impact startups. And they directly impact startups through a number of different ways, but one of them is the liquidity of high net worth and I would say moderately wealthy people. In that, if your like public equity market, if you're like, your E-Trade account is going through the roof, you're feeling great. You also are probably wanting to go to cash in some of those positions, which means now you have cash sitting in some of your accounts, which means you are now actually looking for ways to deploy that cash. When you look at the return profiles that are occurring and what interest rates look like, that directly, I often talk about this like risk window is relative to interest rates. And when interest rates are really low, that you have to actually get into riskier asset classes in order to achieve your expected returns on your family planning investments. When interest rates are high, it shifts the other direction. Because if I can get like 8 points on a bond portfolio, Well, that's actually really, really good. I'll take 8 points at like a 99.9% confidence I'm going to get that money at the maturity of that bond. I'm going to do that all day. The venture capital asset class ranges between 16 and 24% return. The angel investing asset class, like the pre-Series A class, depending on different vintages, can be as high as like 35. I have seen some numbers as high as 42% return. And that's internal rate of return. So it's oftentimes very long time scales. Like your average angel investment can be as long as 12 years. Like that's right now, like 12 years is the typical life cycle from start to liquidity or start to termination of a startup. So if you're an angel and interest rates are high, you're just less likely to deploy capital into startups. Like your risk window shifts towards those less risky products. And if the stock market is not really hot, you're not feeling like you're flying high. And these are individual people. Like these are human beings who like have an E-Trade account and they watch those numbers go up and down. And literally depending on the market movements of that day you pitch that person, it can influence what their decision is going to be. Or within a short window of that pitch, it can influence what their decision is going to be. So angel investing is getting better right now. And partly that's because we're starting to see a little bit more liquidity coming out of startups. So one of the most common populations of angel investors are people who work in startups who did well, right? Their company got bought. They want to get back into that ecosystem. When M&A is down and when IPOs are down, those people do not have liquidity, which means they don't have the money to write those angel checks. We are seeing M&A data go up. I think we had 170 M&A transactions on Carta in this quarter, which is the highest since Q3 2022, which is usually a very good sign. Those are probably down market M&As where companies have finally gotten to the bottom and they finally have sold out at those sort of bargain basement prices, which means that those employees probably didn't do very well. It means that more of the acquiring funds probably did very well. So there's still some M&A partners who are making a lot of money. Where we'll start to unlock is when the IPO market unlocks and when we start seeing, say, traditionally priced M&As occurring. That's when we'll see even more fuel start to come from the angel investor market.
I'd just say the election timeline sometimes throws into
totally.
what's upcoming, where people get a little bit more cautious of what the future is going to look like. So that's usually one in those type of years we see a little bit more, slow down and really see what the future is going to look like before putting a lot of capital out there.
Anyone else?
I'm going to ask a question. This is for Adey. So we all know how RFPs work for grants, but how did we find government contracts, and are they different at a state and federal level?
So there's sam.gov, which I personally do not love because you can enter a search term today and come up with a list, and that same term tomorrow will come up with 0. So, but there are also, so you sort of have to be very specific in what you're looking for. Many of the agencies have broad agency announcements, which are like rolling solicitations. They don't necessarily have a specific deadline. It may depend on a particular area of interest that they are focused on, but they are usually very vast. Other, just really quickly, within DoD, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, which is also known as CDMRP, they receive an annual appropriation. They fund pancreatic cancer research, arthritis, traumatic brain injury, breast cancer, prostate cancer. There's a whole laundry list. But once again, often individuals aren't thinking about DoD in some of these areas. So there's many more. I'm sure over the course of the next 2 days, we'll have an opportunity to talk to either me or my colleague Tanima there, and we can sort of point you in the right direction with regards to where they are. But I will be the first to admit, oftentimes it's a big mystery. It feels like a maze, but we can sort of give you some ideas and some tips to help you to identify those.
Great, thanks. We only have about a minute left, but I did want to ask one final question of each of you, and that's if people want to connect with you, learn about your expertise, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Phone, email, LinkedIn, cocktails, dinner?
Cocktails.
Yes.
All right.
All of the above.
All of it.
Yeah, LinkedIn's great.
yeah, very active on LinkedIn. Really can be a conduit between a lot of different angles as well. So happy to chat with anybody that'd like to reach out. Be here next couple of days. So hopefully a lot of good conversation as well.
LinkedIn also, and I'm apierce@bdo.com, which is also easy to remember. So
I hope that you find my business partner B in the audience and also chat with her. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.